I've had to sort of evolve over time. Um, my physics classes obviously were face to face, so interacting with students was quite easy. But when you have an online course, it isn't always so. I had taught Astronomy 101 in face-to-face environments back when I was a adjunct at Jefferson Community College. So this was a new experience for me. Um, so it's an ever-going journey. Initially, it was involved trying to find ways to engage with the students. Then there was also the side of it trying to make sure everything was ADA compatible, because again, you're online, the students are likely to be using screen readers, et cetera, to get to your material. So I will be talking a little bit about that in this talk as well. So it is a journey that I've not reached the end of. I plan on retiring perhaps in about 5 years, and at that point in time, I think it'll probably be at an end, at least for me, and I'll turn it over to some other capable hands. This course, because of its nature, and before I brought all my other classes online, was the least to be student interactive. I knew that going in. So when I applied for the KOOL Academy, it was my goal to try and talk to others, learn from others, and find ways to make it a bit more student-centric than it was. And I think I've moved in that direction to the point where I did submit the course for ECP review through Blackboard's Exemplary course program, and did this past year get the ECP Award for this particular course. So I have lots of things that I'm going to be trying to share. Some of it may be things you already do in your courses. Some of it may be something that you've thought about but wasn't sure. I did that today. In fact, I went to a VoiceThread talk that I've been doing VoiceThread seminars, whatever, trying to figure out, is this something I want to add? And I think I will, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. So maybe if you see somebody else has done something that you're thinking about doing and shows you how they did it, it might give you that impetus to try it in your own course. That's my hope. So one of the things I've done is discussion boards, and discussion boards do promote critical reflection and higher thinking. In my case, what I did, I tried to move away from what we normally think of with a discussion board, where I might pose an astronomy related question and have students write a summary of it and then comment on two others. One of the things that I found in the course reviews for my course was that the students were not always making a connection between the course competencies and what was covered in the course. So I decided to go in a slightly different direction with my discussion boards by having 4 discussion board lessons throughout the semester. And the discussion topic was basically the competencies. So this is a discussion board from my first module in my astronomy course. It has 4 of the competencies that are specifically addressed in the chapters that are covered in that particular module. And so what I have the students do is pick one of these and then go into the textbook and find a couple of examples in the textbook. It could be in one chapter, it could be in multiple chapters, that's tied to that particular competency, and write about that. Write a short reply, about 6 to 7 sentences in length, about what the two examples were, and how they fit. I also try and get the students to get that initial discussion piece on their side to be done by the Tuesday of the week it's due, so that the other students have an opportunity over the next 2 days before due dates to be able to read, find another example that's not their own, and comment on it as well. And that was actually one of the suggestions that came out of one of the session reviews with our course reviews. One of my students suggested that he found it difficult to find other examples of what students had written when students weren't doing anything until right up to the due date. So I imposed this, if you will, early due date for the initial discussion piece. And I'm trying it out this semester, and I'm waiting to see what the results are in the course evaluations there. I also provide them with an example of what I'm looking for, because a lot of times I'm dealing with students that are first year students. In the Astronomy 101 class, I do sometimes have sophomores, but usually it's freshmen, and they may not know how to write, if you will, a discussion piece of the type that I'm trying to get them to write. So one of the things that I've learned in the KOOL Academy that could be of help was to provide an example. If you were doing something like what you're asking them to do, what would you write? And then how would you write about it? So I took an example from one of the physics courses I'm teaching, so that I wasn't giving them something they could actually just copy and paste and use. But I gave them, I picked a competency, and then I went into the textbook I'm using, and I found a couple examples to write about. And you can see there's roughly about 6 to 7 sentences in each of those paragraphs. But it gives them an idea that they can't just write 1 or 2 sentences and they're done. Okay, I want them to think about it. I want them to put some thought into what the competency is, what the examples are that they found, and how they're tied together. Because I wanted that piece that was necessary for them to do the critical thinking on this. One of the things I like about the discussion board in Blackboard is that it does give me analytics. First of all, to tell me if they did in fact complete the assignment, if all 3 substantive posts have been done. Substantive is still iffy there. I'm still working on an example of what that should actually look like as well. It also tells me some other things that I find to be revealing. If I was an English teacher, I think I'd even find it more revealing. But it gives me the sentence complexity, lexical variation, critical thinking level, all sorts of interesting information that can be included, word variation, how many responses and replies there were, average word count, all sorts of things for comparing the student to the class average. There's part of me that says it'd be nice to share this, and I guess I could share this with the students and let them know this is what they are doing versus what they should be doing in a college level class, but I haven't gone that way yet. Don't know if that's going to be advantageous or not. Another area that I explore in my astronomy class are collaborative student activities, this was geared to where I have just one assignment. I don't try and oversell the group activity thing. I just have one group activity, and basically what I want this to be is for them to work in a group. 2 or 3 students, depends on the number of students in the class that semester, working on one assignment throughout the entire semester. And that way, they're hopefully will give the students a sense that they actually belong to the class. At least they have 1 or 2 other people that they belong to, if nothing else. So in this particular assignment, what I do, this is an astronomy class after all. One of the assignments that I had them do in the past was to go out on a clear night, roughly once a month. For a 16-week class, that meant roughly 4, maybe 5 times, depending on how they interpreted once a month. Get outside about an hour or so after sunset and try and find some objects that are visible in the sky at this time. And I'll give them a list of those objects for each semester. Some of these objects might be constellations, some of them might be planets. They may be asterisms. I try and use the terminology that they're going to find in the textbook so that they make that connection between words they see in the readings and words that what they really mean when they actually go to put it into practice. The idea is that each group will meet. I usually set up a collaborate room for them to work in, but they can use their phones if they want to as well, and they will work on the aspects of this assignment. Now, if I give them a list of various objects, then they can take that group of objects and maybe divvy it up among the people in that group, each one locating those maybe 2 or 3 objects as opposed to say 15, and report back to the group after the event to say how successful or unsuccessful they were in finding X, Y, and Z, whatever they were, and then compiling all that into a log for that particular night's observation, and then do it 3 more times, and then submit a group log at the end. So in this way, they're making decisions as to which objects each person is going to try and help the rest of the group learn how to find. And so there's student learning going on. There's group interaction going on. At least in principle, that's what I'm hoping that's what it is going on. To set up that kind of assignment in Blackboard is relatively easy. You can do it under the assignment settings. You can put a due date on it. You want to, obviously, if it's a group assignment, you definitely want to allow class conversations. I almost missed that point when I was doing this initially. It was like, oh, well, I didn't bother checking that box now. I couldn't understand why they couldn't talk to each other. But yeah, you learn as you go along. So it's an assignment. There's usually just one attempt because it's a log that they're compiling over the course of the semester, and they're going to submit it for grading purposes. And there's no form or format that I expect them to do. I just want them open up Word and type in the responses that everybody's in the group and then submit. So it's really there's not really it's hard to fail this one unless you simply don't do it. If you go the trouble to follow the instructions and you submit it, there's no reason to go beyond one attempt because it just it's the nature of the assignment is that if everybody is contributing, they should have a log by the end of the semester. Some of the other things that you can assign, I don't, but there are other things that Blackboard will ask you about when you're setting up the assignment. So you could put a description, but then again, I put the description in the assignment itself, so putting it in this box is not very useful as well. Of course, you have to set up the groups, and so when you go into Blackboard to set up into a group assignment, for example, initially you're given a blank slate. You can then either customize the groups that you create. You can randomly assign students to groups, or you can specifically assign certain students to certain groups. It's your call as to how you want to make that happen. So once you start creating your groups, you can name them to make sure they're all identifiable. Obviously, this is an astronomy class, so I decided to use star names for the names of the groups. When I created the rooms in Collaborate, I gave them the same name so that the Albireo group would know that they use the Albireo Collaborate room to meet in and discuss how they're going to do their observation and so on and so forth. I usually use the random assignment because I don't know these students. I don't know them because I don't see them in class. Obviously, it's an online class, and they're coming to me from potentially all 16 colleges. So the chances of me knowing somebody that's at Western Kentucky or somebody down at Hazard are slim and none. So I'm not going to know per se who to put with what in any one group. Now, I did this semester for the first time. I had a husband and wife both in the same class, and I did put them in the same group because they asked if they could be in the same group. Now, sometimes that may not happen. They may not want to be in the same group, but these two did ask, and I said, sure, fine. Created that group specifically, and then randomized everybody else into their own groups. This is the second semester I've been trying this. I'm still trying to get a sense for it. I do occasionally have that student that doesn't want to talk to the other students. And so I have to send a message off to that student saying, you know, this is a group assignment. You're part of that group. I said, you know, and I can, you know, and I can be kind of heavy-handed on it to the point where I'll tell them, you know, if you've decided you don't want to participate in this assignment, I'll just give you a 0 and move on, and you can make up your grades some other way. So so right now it is sort of the carrot and the stick type process to get this group assignment done. I may not necessarily be doing it the best possible way, and I'm obviously open to anybody that has had better success than I may be having for suggestions or whatever. I'm not the expert here. I'm just telling you what I've done so far to make this course a bit more student-centric than I have before. Now, as I mentioned, the biggest part of my journey, and the one I will spend a little bit more time on as well, is ADA compatibility or accessibility. There are benefits to the students as well as the faculty, and of course the law does compel us to do it. So it's not something that we can just kind of look askance at. We're supposed to be doing it anyway. My understanding is the system office is going to start making it more and more obvious that we need to be doing this. So so in some cases, getting it done and getting it done right is relatively easy if once you start doing it. And once you do start doing it, you get in that habit, you do it all the time, and after that, it's second nature. As to the students that use screen readers, for example, are able to hear blocks of text. Headings are usually important for that to be successful, and I'll talk a little bit about headings in Microsoft Word in a little bit. The other advantage is that the headings provide a hierarchy to the page. The students can then come back in if they're maybe reading it to prepare for a test or whatever, a quiz. They can skim the page using those headings and jump from section to section in that particular document. To the faculty, once you've adopted a set of headings in your documents, chosen the size of the font, things like that, if you use it, have the same look. And you okay? I heard a voice. Anyway, once you've decided how you want your documents to look in that class, all of them get the same treatment, if you will. So that does provide a consistency. If you have to make changes in that document, the way Word has it set up, if you make the changes, if you edit the headings, and then you make the choice, and anything that you put at that heading level gets automatically changed. So you don't have to go back time and time and change it like you would if you were, say, bolding certain sections, where you'd have to go back and bold it using a different font, or bold it using a different size, and then go to the next one and do the same thing over and over again. So the nice thing about using the headings is if you make the change, if you modify the heading itself, then everywhere where that heading was used in your document immediately gets updated, and it can save you some time as well. The consistency I've already mentioned. If you have consistent formatting, that makes it easier for the students. It also makes it easier for you when you're looking at your documents. There's a table of contents that gets created when you're using the headings, and that can be used for very quickly moving through the document. You can use that. Your students can use it as well. So it makes it very, very nice if they need to get to a certain section, or you need to get to a certain section that you need to go and edit or remove or update depending on the circumstances. The navigation pane that can show up on the side of the document gives you access to that. So you can move very quickly through your document. And you can make a link to your document that jumps from heading to heading from different parts of your document using those headings as a jumping tool. But of course, you get none of that if you do nothing more than make text bold or big or underlined or whatever, which is how a lot of us probably did do and may still do the creation of our documents. Syllabi come to mind. when it comes to the documents we use in our classes. To get access to the styles, you want to use the home ribbon in the Word document, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Now, obviously, you don't want to do a lot of work on your documents if you don't have to. So, Blackboard's or Anthology's Ally, which comes with Blackboard, at least for our Blackboard, gives you an opportunity to look at your entire course and what you've uploaded to it, and check it for accessibility issues. You get access to it by going to the books and tools. Trying to get to where it'll show up here. I think that's it. Books and tools, and choose on the course and institutions page. If you click on that, then that will give you a large column of possible options that you can scroll through that have been that are available to you depending on your college. What you're looking for is the accessibility report, and if you click on the accessibility report, it'll give you an overall score for your course. Obviously, what you want is this number to be as big as it can get. Mine's at 98, which means I still have a few things to work on, although I have talked to the powers that be, and it seems that the things that Ally wants me to fix are things I have no control over. So, 98%, nobody's going to come knocking on my door and saying, you need to get that 2%. They're not going to do it. It means that for the most part, my course has been judged to be quite compatible when it comes to ADA compatibility. As I said, it has been the journey that I've been undertaking for some time. So I'm kind of proud of myself that I've gotten to this point. As to the individual documents, Ally can also help you individually with documents as you upload them to your course. Here's a sample syllabus that I uploaded to my Blackboard shell, my sandbox, for purposes of demonstration. And you see that initially it has an orange flag by it. If I click on that, can't click on this document. If I were to click on that, then what I would get to is a little bit more detail about the document, what the issue Ally has found with it. Here it says that this document doesn't have any headings. All right, so apparently I didn't bother heading. I did a more traditional bold everything, center it, break it down into sections, whatever, but use the bolding to help separate the document into different sections. Of course, I don't have all the details in there. I just wanted to demonstrate it with this document. So, of course, if that's the case, then I can use the fact that some suggestions have been made to go back into the document and try to get that document better. The other places where you may find ADA compatibility issues, one of the things that Ultra allows you to do is to break your course up into modules. I believe there's another talk that's going to be given or has been given on module advantage in Ultra. Modules are very effective of chunking the material that into smaller pieces. It does make the students get less overwhelmed. And you have a 16-week course, and you have 16 weeks of readings and 16 weeks of quizzes and 16 weeks of review exercises and maybe 4 tests, and you have them all listed one after the other. You can turn off students very quickly. But if you chunk that material, then they can move through the course a bit better and perhaps aren't quite as overwhelmed by the large amount of material that they're going to be responsible for by the time that you get there. So Module 0 is one that has a lot of areas where ADA compatibility issues might show up and that you may need to get addressed. You have things like course overview, course instructor, syllabus, etc. are some of the items that usually show up in that Module 0. And the nice thing about it is that material is always there in one one module that the students can go back to every time and very quickly find, okay, where do I go if I need technical help? Where can I go if I need to find the syllabus? And it's all in one spot. They don't have to go hunting for it if you've identified that in Module 0. One of the places where you're encouraged to interact with the students is providing a picture of yourself. Now, I know some people just don't like to do that, but I don't care. This is a picture of me sitting at my desk here in my office at Maysville, and you'll notice it has a green flag beside it, and that's because I've also provided an alternate text to this picture, which is critical for those students that are using a screen reader. Screen reader can't read a picture, but what it will do when it encounters a picture is it'll read the alternate text for that picture. So in this case, I probably wrote something like a picture of myself sitting at my desk or something like that, and that's what the reader will hear from the screen reader when it gets to this particular picture. So again, the screen reader will have already read through all the text, and it gets to this picture and gets a little bit more information in it, and that that is useful. You'll see some banners here. The banners were actually provided externally. I didn't put them in here. They're ADA compatible, obviously, and they're probably listed as decorative, but they also have their green indicators to show that they're good to go. Video is another way that you can interact with your students, but if you use video, then you should be using closed captioning. The way I do closed captioning basically is to send all my videos up to YouTube and then work with them from there. So if this was a playable thing, and it isn't, but if it was, I could turn on the closed captioning part and you could see the words that match up to my voice. So that's something else that needs to be considered if you're using videos, not only an introductory video, which is just good practice to get the students familiar with who you are and what you're all about and what you think the course is going to be all about, but also it's good practice for compatibility as well. Here you can see where I uploaded my syllabus. This is again in Module 0. The students can come back here time and time again. They can download it. If they click on the 3 dots there, they actually get different ways in which they can download the syllabus, which again lends to the ADA compatibility. They can download it as a document, but they can also download it for a screen reader. They can download it for lots of other things. So this is one of the really nice benefits of having Ally imported into Blackboard in terms of students being able to access information. The other area that you need to concern yourself with, for those of us that do it, is if you're importing publisher information. You should work with your publisher to make sure their material is ADA accessible. If you're going to be held to that standard, but you're using somebody else's material, especially a publisher who's charging for you to use that material, the least they can do is to work with you in terms of making that material ADA compatible. So I mentioned earlier that modules are the way to go, and Blackboard Ultra really makes it nice to create modules and then to fill modules with a variety of things. In my case, I've got a module overview. Each of my modules look pretty much the same. The module overview actually contains a video that is going to specifically talk about what the student should expect in terms of topics covered in that particular module. I will introduce, for example, the course competencies for the first time, or second time actually, if they've read the syllabus, specific to that particular module. I've also included a link to effective textbook reading. A lot of these kids aren't going to be necessarily comfortable reading science textbooks, and when you read a science textbook, it actually is different as to how you approach it than if you're reading a novel, for example, or even a web page. So So I've provided a link for that. Then, of course, within the module, I have different folders. Each folder, it covers the week, a particular week, and I have the due date for that week. If you open that folder, it specifically has chunked within it just the stuff that's due for that particular chapter at that particular due date. The only exception would be the review questions, and I have the review questions due the same day as the last time the test is available for them. So I want them to do the review questions all the way up to the very, very possible last moment they could start the test. And so that due date's obviously a little bit different, but everything else in this folder is due at the due date that I have there. So I have the due date there in the header for that folder. They can also see the due date of the different items that are due that week. And again, that chunk of material means that they aren't going to be necessarily overwhelmed. Each of my modules might contain about 4 folders, 4 weeks of material. So the module isn't overly burdensome, at least on appearance, when the students open up the module and begin working their way through it.
We have about 5 more minutes. Okay, perfect. Great.
Good. So we're at 5 more minutes and we got questions. Do we have questions?
I'm looking in the chat and I don't see any questions, just a few comments about that weekly module folders make it easy to follow. A couple people were giving options of transcribing their videos using Zoom or using Teams to stream, and Screencast-O-Matic. So that's all we have at the moment.
Yeah, any of those would probably work. I mean, you could probably do Teams. I haven't explored it myself. I just happened to fall back on YouTube because I've been using it the longest amount of time. And so that's my default, but it isn't necessarily the one. What I do in Teams basically, or what I do in YouTube, and I actually cover this in another talk that I'm giving. That's why I was kind of confusing myself as to which talk I was giving and what I was going to see. But in another talk that I'm giving later, this in about 2 weeks, I spend more time talking about what you do in YouTube. YouTube used to provide what it would call closed captioning to a video, but of course it was rough because depending on the pronunciation that you used and dialect and all sorts of things, what you got in the text was not necessarily what was being said on the screen. And so you had to actually go in and edit it so that the words were actually what were being spoken. What I've gone to instead is I'll open that pane for dealing with the closed captioning, and I'll just upload my script. I'll just copy and paste the text in, and then what YouTube will do is it'll align it and then get back to me when the alignment's done. And that way I know for a fact that everything is already grammatically correct because I'm pulling it from the script that I've already read from, and I don't have to go back in and fix all that. But YouTube is one that does it. It isn't necessarily the easiest or the hardest or whatever. It just happens to be the one I do.
Before I go to the next question, I just wanted everyone to know that we have a random session attendance award, and that goes to Melissa Dalton. She has won a USB-C hub. So you can expect that from our KOOL conference. Now, our next question. That's right. Our next question is, do you have checkpoints for group work? I did group work years ago, and students would ghost the groups, or students in groups would complain about other group members not working. I felt like I was working harder than the students were.
Well, unfortunately, my classes are not overly large anymore because the need for the AS and AA, for example, seems to include a science with a lab component, especially in the AA. And our AA is bigger than our AS in terms of students passing through. So I don't have a lot of AS students that can just take a science class. And then if you scatter that over 16 colleges, you don't pick up that many more. So usually I have maybe 3 groups of maybe 2 or 3 people each. And early on, because I keep reminding them that, don't forget you've got these two assignments, these 2 semester-long assignments. Well, one's only a month long. It's a moon phase assignment. But I'll remind them about the one, and it doesn't take long before I get an email from somebody saying, I've been trying to contact my group members and are not responding. And if I get such a notice, then that's when I will send a message through Blackboard to the offending individual saying, you're in a group. If you don't want to do group work, let me know. I'll move you out, give you a 0 for this assignment, and I'll move your other partner into a group that is working. And once I've made that quote unquote threat, I've not had anybody come back 3 or 4 weeks later say, I'm still not hearing anything from my group members. And it's not because they've dropped the course. As I look and see if they've dropped the course, they're still in it. So I'm assuming that would work. But I don't have a large class, so it's pretty easy for me to manage. And fortunately, I haven't had too many times where that has been something I've had to do. I think it's been once in 2 semesters or something like that so far. But of course, it's still new. It's like 3 semesters old, so it could change. Sure. But in my experience so far, I think I've only had to do it once or twice in the 3 semesters.
Yeah, we had another participant state that they used forms to rate each other and then rate themselves for a peer evaluation that seemed to help with that. So, but it does seem like,
that does seem like an interesting idea.
Yeah, but that could be a little bit more difficult when you're talking about classes that are over, 30 students or 35 students that you're getting all these evaluation forms. So.
Right. But then again, if everybody's doing their job, you're not going to get very many of them at all. So.
Right. Hopefully. I also, for all the participants in the chat, I also included the end of the day evaluation. If you look in the chat, there is a link there that you can complete today's evaluation because this is the last session. Do we have any other questions for Scott?
Well, thank you all for attending, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and tomorrow's conference.
That's right. Well, thanks, Scott, and thanks everyone for participating. And remember to fill out your evaluation for today. Thanks again.